Hello, and welcome to the programme. This is the weekly protest podcast. On this week's show, we discuss Philip Hammond's housing targets. Are they too ambitious? And is it just a distraction of the current Brexit negotiations? Also, we talk about Brexit. What will a post-Brexit Britain look like? Will it be poor? Will it be rich? Also, we talk about globalisation. Has it worked for the UK? Has it worked for the world? We go in depth. This week's episode is entitled Build Up, Not Out, and features the voices of Jack Wolfan, Django Barry, Thomas Jordan, Louis Driscoll, and Charlie Wilkinson. Enjoy. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the weekly protest podcast. I'm very glad to be joined by some new people this episode. I'm joined here by Charlie.
Hello.
By Louis Driscoll.
Hi.
By the Thomas Jordan again.
Morning.
And Django Barry, our token conservative.
Good morning, everyone.
Hello. Okay, so...
What if they're watching in the afternoon?
Well, that
could be
got an
possible.
issue.
Well done, Django.
It's being recorded in the morning.
Stop assuming people are going to be listening in the
Stop
morning.
assuming
okay?
genders, you're evil.
I know, I am.
Anyway, so the budget. 2017 is only a day away. We are recording this on the 21st of November. And Philip Hammond is planning to announce plans to build 300,000 new homes a year. Now, these may not all be affordable homes. These may not all be council properties. But what do you think? Do you think that the 300 figure is achievable? Do you think it's possible? And do you think we're building enough affordable and council homes? I'm going to start with Django. Django, you are a member of the Conservative Party, correct?
That's right, yeah.
Do you think your Chancellor has made the right decision by making this announcement?
Well, 300,000 more homes per year is certainly what this country needs in terms of building infrastructure. We are currently being grappled. Everyone who's looking to buy homes are struggling to afford the homes, and so we need to build more homes to expand the supply, which will hopefully eventually meet the demand. Is it 300,000 more homes or 300,000 homes per year?
300,000 more homes per year he wants to
Yeah,
build. He wants to build a target. Yeah, 300,000 new homes a year built.
It's achievable. After World War II, we built houses at an astonishing rate due to the Nazis bombing so many urban areas, and so I do believe that it is achievable, just as long as we have the right materials.
So one question that you could put to that is that by building these 300,000 homes a year, we might have to start building on the green belt. Charlie, what do you think?
The green belt exists not as... I think there's a lot of misconceptions about the green belt because it's to stop urban sprawl more than to protect the environment, and I think therefore there's an argument for just going into it and reasserting a new green belt. I don't think, honestly, from an environmental perspective, it's that much of an issue. However, it does exist for a reason. There is reasons to try and limit urban sprawl. I don't know. It definitely needs to be the main debate that's happening, I think, to do with housing. But I have no solid opinions yet.
So, Tom, do you think these houses will be affordable?
I'm not sure.
Now, this is bearing in mind. This is bearing in mind the Chancellor who made this announcement said in the same interview with Andrew Marr that there are no unemployed people.
Said it twice as well.
Well, he said that people only lost their jobs through an advancement in technology. For example, shorthand typewriters. But then
we'll talk about that.
We developed new industries and new jobs from that. So that's TJ, what he meant.
Do you think these homes will be affordable, or do you believe the Chancellor when he says affordable homes?
I think it depends how he's going to build them. If he's going to get private companies to build them, which is very likely when he says the government will simply not pour money in. It will be up to the private companies to decide how they're going to build it, how they're going to pay for it. There's 400,000 people homeless on the streets in the UK today. 300,000 housing, it'll be up to the highest bidder who gets these houses. The government if they're getting private companies to do this, won't have a say in how they're going to set the prices. So it'll be as affordable as the companies want to make them.
Didn't I'm pretty sure Theresa May said a few days ago that it'd be 80 grand per house for the new affordable houses. Do you know? Does everyone know the definition of an affordable house?
The thing is, affordable housing.
So what an affordable house is 80% of average market rent.
But also, affordable housing is always judged by the government of the day, gets to decide what affordable means. Affordable is one of those terms where it could mean anything. What do you think, Louis? Do you think?
Well, I've experienced this firsthand. Like, there's houses being built behind me in a field behind me, and in the beginning, the council were like, "Oh, it's all affordable housing." It got postponed because the first private company that came in couldn't afford it. They sold it on. 2 years later, the houses are built, but now only a third of the houses are affordable. The rest are just rented to anyone who wants them. So I've seen this happen time and time again in my area. More and more people building affordable houses just end up not affordable.
Is this are these houses being built for ownership or rent? Like what's the plan?
It's a bit of both. I did do a little bit of research into this. A economist at Oxford University called Martin Beck said extra borrowing for construction could ultimately be offset by the revenue from renting or selling the properties. So it's going to be a bit of both. Obviously, I think it would be because it's a Conservative government given to private renters, or there is going to be a growing. Theresa May has made a pledge to grow the number of council houses.
Now to come back on that, Django, there's lots of these houses that are being built, but then they're being offered firstly, not to the people in this country, not to those who need it most, but to people overseas, to Russians and to.
Well, they would.
They're not overseas at the moment. I mean, they're still offered to people who.
You can't live in a British house if you're not living in Britain.
And also
you can keep it empty.
Jack, these overseas investors tend to.
Yeah, that's not a job with. That's not an issue with affordable housing. That's an issue with.
It's also not a racial issue.
I'm not saying. No, but also.
I understand what you mean. He's basically saying people from countries that are nowhere near England having houses in England, which doesn't benefit them. The only thing it benefits for them is that they make money off it.
No, I tell you what, an interesting article which I have seen. I think it was by the BBC actually. It was one where they were looking at Chinese investors going up into the north and buying properties up there. And I think an interesting comparison to make with that is the recent New Zealand election. I know that's a kind of non sequitur, but
which
the Labour won illegitimately, may I say. Anyway.
Do tell.
Let's move on the conversation.
Anyway,
what about hacking Trump?
The problem. Okay, so the reason why New Zealand got, the reason why Labour got so many people to vote for them in the New Zealand election was because of this housing issue in New Zealand. Okay, and they said that they would stop the foreign investors from buying up New Zealand properties. But the National Party, which is the equivalent to the Conservative Party in New Zealand, said that no, we want to build homes, which is what the Conservative Party are pledging to do. What the Labour government in New Zealand has already done is introduce tariffs between them and Australia and them and Vietnam. Okay, New Zealand has grown exponentially over the past decade or two, actually. And that was because
the
economy. Anyway, and that is because they got themselves involved in international trade, and they made themselves a global country. And it was over the past decade, it's been particularly acute with this last national government. Okay, but now Labour are introducing tariffs, which is putting a strain on the Australian-New Zealand relationship and the wider Southeast Asian dynamic. And so the idea to stop foreign investors would be not beneficial to Britain, in my view. And what would be beneficial is if we provide the homes to balance out the foreign investment and the demand from native Britons.
So let's bring it just slightly back onto message in terms of there are ways that these private investing companies are getting around it by saying, we're going to build a housing estate, and we're going to have affordable homes because the government have a quota on affordable homes. But that will decrease, and the amount of affordable homes will be, minute. And then you have I was watching a program where they have like 2 entrances. I don't know if any of you saw it. You have the front fancy schmancy entrance, and then you have the poor door at the back where all the affordable homes are put. The entrance around the back with the bins.
By the St Mary Redcliffe, that massive new city chic living, massive new building. They've got nice front doors at the front, but then for like actual housing, go around the back.
Bit of an issue. What I wanted to ask, sorry, I don't really understand about this. Do we have any indication yet about how much money has actually been proposed? Because it was only a month ago only a month and a bit ago that Theresa May said she'd give $2 billion.
It will be announced in the budget.
Yeah, that won't.
I know it will be announced in the budget. I'm just wondering if there's been any advances since she had already said that it'd be $2 billion.
Well, the media
well,
suspects that there will be borrowing taking place to build these homes. Sajid Javid
what we do know is Sajid Javid is reported, because he's Community Secretary, Communities and Local Government, is reported he wants £50 billion to be put into a house building drive. But in this interview with Andrew Marr, Philip Hammond refused to commit to that. Though, to be honest, that isn't particularly surprising, because he wouldn't commit before a budget, because that would steal his thunder and for scrutiny. So we're going to have to find out. The budget is tomorrow. I'll be watching it carefully, partially because of my interest in politics and also because of my studies. But we'll have to watch a bit closer. But thank you very much on that. So, Brexit means Brexit, as they say. Brexit negotiations seem to have slightly stalled, if that's a bit of an understatement. We've definitely seen, I don't know if anyone saw yesterday, on the 20th, things like the Drugs Authority and the Financial Authority has been moved to, I think it was Amsterdam and Paris, respectively. My question is, what is our post-Brexit vision? What will post-Brexit Britain look like? Will it be good? Will it be bad? I want the good, bad, the ugly. Louis, as someone who kind of slightly quite likes the idea of leaving the European Union for various reasons, what do you think our post-Brexit future looks like?
Well, without spilling too much into our next topic, it all depends on what we do with it. Because the EU has limited our globalisation efforts with other countries. So now that we leave, it all depends on if we further our globalisation efforts with other countries to improve our trade and our free trade to expand as a country alone. But then again, with the ranks in the Conservative government falling apart, the backstabbing, just the overall run down talks, it looks like we're not going to come off well at the moment. But I still think it's a better decision to come out than stay back in.
See, I have an objection at this point. A large part of the Leave group was to reclaim British business. Like Michael Gove going on his fishing boat about protecting fisheries, like going to war with Iceland over some fish or whatever.
The Cod Wars.
Yeah,
the Cod Wars.
As Charlie says, the Cod Wars. But my point is, the European Union would purposefully restrict our trade with the wider world, as a Commonwealth, and I'm sure Django will rant on about for a minute, in order to protect our business, British businesses. We have no barriers now to stop transnational companies, big corporations, sending jobs out to India or Vietnam, where there's no minimum wage. They can pay people a lot cheaper.
Surely that's already happening.
I thought a sovereign government has that power.
That's already happening in China. And
it's already been happening.
Like you said, it is futile because the EU takes away our sovereignty to decide what we do. But when we leave, they're going to decide to take it away from the British business anyway. I feel a Conservative government will not support the British companies.
Yeah,
even though they say they do, I feel like they will look for a cheaper alternative to give a quick boost to our economy, because that's what we need really. We need a boost to our economy. We need something to get off our feet out of this sort of recession.
So Charlie, I look down at your notes and I see a nice statement in capital letters. To those who aren't in here in our fantastic studio,
show the microphone.
Music department walking in.
It says in capital letters, in giant capital letters, Brexit means Brexit.
This is only because I forgot to write any notes on Brexit. But I think the only main thing I have to say on Brexit is that a lot of people, particularly in the Labour Party, are acting like Brexit is the end of days. Like when Brexit happens,
the world's going to end.
Britain is going to sink into the sea and everyone's going to instantly die.
The tectonic plates.
At the end of the day, Brexit, the EU is an economic union. It's a market. It's not something that should be viewed as like some kind of perfect utopia. And so I think upon leaving it probably will be a hit to the economy, but we'd less have to concentrate on how we're going like damage reduction, and more concentrate on how we'll recover afterwards. And I think that's where we're going with it, because I don't know much about how the negotiations are going at the moment.
Yeah, that's definitely a true statement.
You're going to bring in Liam Fox again?
Nope, I won't, but he's a great example of why globalisation will work for Britain. But anyway, you said something really important there. We don't know how the negotiations are going behind closed door. Michel Barnier recently came out with a statement, and he sounded quite gloomy, but you'll notice that the Brexit negotiations on our side sound overly optimistic. The Brexit negotiators on the EU side sound overly pessimistic. I think the most important place to judge where we are in the Brexit negotiations is just in the middle. I will say, however, that only 15% of the world economy is based around the EU, and it is set to shrink over the coming decade or two to only 12%. The rest of the world is growing. Countries like Nigeria and India require a lot of investment, and the EU wouldn't be willing to give that investment because the EU is trying to be self-sufficient, and then the EU's a route into a wider European trade bloc. Once we are out, we will be able to trade in abundance with the roughly 170 countries outside the EU, plus of course the EU countries coming trading with them. As for what post-Brexit Britain will look like, it will be, in my opinion, in a coming decade or two, will be a lot more of a multinational society, because we will have developed trading relationships with the Commonwealth, with the United States, Japan, and many other Asian countries. I think it will look bright.
So let's look at Theresa May. She chaired a meeting of her cabinet where they were discussing the possibility of giving a higher figure to European negotiators on how much they're willing to pay as a kind of exit payment.
The divorce bill.
The divorce bill. Yeah. Because Mr. Barnier and Mr. Juncker have said that we have got a good free trade agreement that is, has the possibility of, being brought, but without discussing the divorce bill first, will we get to it? So, I got one question. I just want a one-word answer from each of you. Do you think we'll leave with a deal or without a deal? Django.
Yes, we'll leave with the deal.
That's not one word, Django.
Yeah, well, you asked a question that required multiple words.
I just
yes or no.
Okay. Tom.
Will we leave with a deal, yes or no? That's what you should have said.
Deal yes, no deal no. Cool.
Okay. Will we leave with a deal, yes or no?
No.
Yes.
Yes.
But is it a deal we want? That's the true question.
That is a good point, and actually I love the fact that the Conservative government, has decided to bring the eventual deal as a vote to the House of Commons, because essentially Labour will want to vote down the deal, but they know that if they do vote down the deal, then they've gone back on their word of saying that any deal is better than no deal.
Yeah.
And so it puts them in a precarious position. But yeah, I think it will be interesting times coming soon.
Okay. So, final question, if I can think of what I was about to say. My final question is another yes or no answer of...
Because that went so well last time.
So, my final question in 5 years' time, in 2022, will Britain, this is yes or no question, economically, will Britain be poorer? Django.
Yes, Britain will be poor in 2022.
No.
Tom? No? Louis?
Inevitably, yeah.
Yes.
Charlie?
Same.
Our philosophical question this week is, has globalisation been a success for the UK and for the world? So this is a big question. Obviously, it's going to encompass a lot of things. It's going to have links with Brexit as well. I think I'm going to start with Charlie first. So, Charlie, do you think globalisation has been a positive or a negative for the UK and for the world?
Ooh, it's an interesting one, right? I think it depends who you're looking at, like which people within the UK. Did you? Don't worry. Within the UK and within the world, like, so corporations have benefited massively. So if you're looking at the CEOs of these massive corporations, they're doing brilliantly. Individuals with a massive amount of wealth were already doing great and are doing even better with globalization. But then, you know, the poorest people in our country have probably there's been a net negative impact, certainly, the loss of jobs and moving of industries from the UK to places like Bangladesh and China. But it's all about the frame of reference. But I think certainly the people who I believe are more important, we talk about the positive and negative effects, which is the poorest in any country. Probably there's been a net negative. Of course, some places have benefited.
Are you saying that the world, that over the past 30 years, 1 billion people being lifted out of poverty due to globalization is a bad thing for the poorest people in the world?
How do you know that's due to globalization? What is
because it's happened in countries like Nigeria and countries like China and countries like Bangladesh and India, that this emancipation of people from poverty has taken place.
But surely, Django, you can't argue that there haven't been problems with globalization.
Oh yes, there's certainly been problems, but we've got to also just remember quickly that Britain has always been a globalized country. I mean, since the 19th century. I mean, we had a global empire. We've been a global economy since then. Our wealth as a nation has been largely created due to our trading networks.
But we're not producing anything to trade. It's all gone off to China, gone off to
now
places where it's cheaper, where they can exploit workers.
Because of the introduction of the European Union, our home building of manufacturing goods has gone down. But overall, it's been good for Britain because we've turned into a consumerist nation over the past 100 years, from being a manufacturing nation to a consuming nation, because we're one of the original first world countries.
But is that going to last?
Is that going to last?
Is that going to
Are
last?
you not?
But what I'm saying is, like, is the consumerism lifestyle good for Britain? Is it going to sustain us? Because right now, I don't see it is. I feel like the gap's getting bigger between the wealthy and the poor. I feel like.
Have you heard of the cyclic theory of development?
No, enlighten us about the.
Yes, please tell us.
I'm not sure if it's called that, so something like that. It basically says that,
I'm guessing it.
as you've seen with Britain, the first countries to industrialize, they go through the industrial age and they come out and they become consumer societies. If you've seen with like Britain and France and America and Germany, then it shifts. Like we've seen like the shift to Asia, and then Asia becomes more developed and repeats the same thing as you've seen in China. With Django said, like 300 million people in China being lifted out of poverty. But the thing is, you'll still need goods. We don't have the
development
technology.
of new technology like robotics, which are already proving in factories like the Tesla factory that they can build complex machinery without humans building it or aiding it, other than in software. We are moving towards a manufacturing global world
that's the problem
where
theory identifies. When you have robotics replacing jobs on a mass scale, where do these people who've been put out of jobs go? Back into poverty, and who's going to lift them out again?
But over time, like, as what was said by Philip Hammond and largely misconstrued on the Andrew Marr show, new industries develop. People were worried about typers losing their job, shorthand typers, that's what they're called, back in the 60s with the development of the personal computer. But we haven't really seen a massive impact of a lot of jobs in that industry.
Let's let Charlie come in.
So, well, what I wanted to say was linking back to Thomas's point about the kind of the temporary nature of globalization lifting people out of poverty. Because when a big company from another country comes in and builds a factory and employs you there, that's great. That's great for the time being, but it does nothing to improve the actual state of these countries overall. There's an effect on infrastructure, which is great, but it doesn't make a long-term benefit to these countries compared to other ways that we can develop new countries. Like, say for example, I've sure you heard the news story about Zara recently and the notes that have turned up in people's clothes because a factory is closed down, and so hundreds of people have just lost their jobs. And that's it now. They're just back to poverty. It's not long-term development. It's a company dropping in, exploiting them, and coming back out again.
So if they
also,
protest,
additionally,
they shut down the factory,
like,
they lose their jobs.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Can I just so Tom, you talked about kind of Western countries like Britain, France, United States, but Germany you mentioned.
Yeah.
Let's look at, because we're talking about globalization and the effects it has, but let's also talk about kind of the effects that governments have to try and help those who are affected by globalization in a negative way. Germany's manufacturing sector is twice the size of Britain at 23% to Britain's 11%, which is over double the size, and that's because they have they have an industrial strategy. Do you think the British government has done enough to try and tackle the problems that exist through globalization and that affects?
Of course not. Of course not. Like, I don't wanna say anything too controversial, but like we've discussed this before, Thatcher kind of brought in this new idea of working where you move away from the factories and the mines, you come to more of this office setting where
service economy,
yeah. It's like the new style of working in Britain, and that's why we've seen it such a decrease. And like maybe other countries haven't seen such an impactful leader that, in good or for better or for worse, has changed the way that their country sees working, what kind of work they do.
I think also linking on from Louis, Germany is a bit of an exception because after World War II, both America and the Soviet Union just invested loads of it because it was split in half, and it was like the ultimate experiment. Equal population, equal economic wealth. It's the perfect setting for whether communism or capitalism would be better. So both countries invested loads. They built up Germany's industry and services and basically made it into a model state. And as a result, its economy and like industry sectors haven't, as you've seen with Volkswagen, it hasn't taken such a hit. Like, it's came out of the 2008 crisis relatively okay.
So what I'm kind of inferring from what people are saying is the reason why Britain may have not done as well as, let's say, Germany, is because of certain political leaders like Margaret Thatcher's industrial strategy.
Well,
Django, as a Conservative, what would you say to that?
Well, what I would say is what the British government are currently doing to try and keep up with globalisation is invest in industries such as robotics and AI and up-and-coming industries. Philip Hammond was bragging on the Andrew Marr show about the development and the new investments he is going to announce in Wednesday's budget in self-driving cars, and this is an industry which could potentially, if we get at the forefront of it, if we get in the forefront of AI, robotics, and self-driving cars,
there are problems.
There are problems, but there are problems in development. There were problems in the development of the diesel engine.
But then, would you agree with?
But if we are at the forefront of this, then and we have left the European Union with free trade deals with countries like the United States, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, India, Bangladesh, China, etc., we can export these products and hopefully try and get a trade surplus. And if
what I would say to that, Django, is the things with AI and robotics is if we become market leaders in that area, do we sacrifice things like taxi drivers, lorry drivers, bus drivers, train drivers, to the point where we have to introduce things like, I don't know if anybody's heard of the the idea of universal basic income, whether we introduce that as a possible safeguard against globalisation. But I want to ask you this question. This is what I asked you before, and then you veered off about current government. Do you think what Margaret Thatcher did and what the governments of the 80s and Major of the 90s, what they did, do you think they did enough to battle globalisation? Do you think that has been a positive or a negative?
I think they did enough. I mean, if you look at the trading graph, I think I have it up on my phone, although unfortunately this doesn't show video. But what you'll notice in the graph is our trading, the amount we trade, the benefit to what we get for our exports, essentially, the balance between our imports and exports. When there is a Conservative government, and it is quite a striking pattern, when there is a Conservative government, the trade deficit, and we've had a trade deficit for the past 50 odd years, but it decreases, and it goes nearly to a level of roughly zero. When there is a Labour government, it goes below. And so I would say that most certainly a Conservative government is a government that cares for globalisation and wants the best outcome for globalisation for the British people.
Okay, so Louis, your final word on this topic.
Well, yeah, Django's right. After after the fall of the Soviet Union, most parties in most countries decided maybe this extreme left is not a good way to go. This we need to move more centre or more right. And then globalisation has become the only feasible option for some of these governments. But bringing it back to the political issue, not just the economic issue, it increases apathy in our country. I feel that the people don't feel represented, and it also increases support for extremist parties such as the BNP that want the rights for the British people, the benefits for the British, things like that. Also, and this is I don't see this as much, but many people do claim that lots of terrorist incidents is due to people or groups from these countries that are being exploited, these LEDCs that are being exploited by certain globalisation companies from Britain taking action against it. So it creates all these problems that may or may not be the leading cause, but globalisation is a difficult topic when it comes to what the government needs to do to get the support of the people.
Well, thank you very much for that very comprehensive discussion. So now we come to one of my favourite parts of the episode. It's a new segment we're going to try out. I've got Tom Jordan here, who is an avid reader and an avid reader of various political books, and he's going to give us his political book review in a minute or under. What's the title of this week's book, Tom?
I've been reading Who Lost Russia by Peter Conradi.
You've got a minute in 3, 2, 1, go.
Peter Conradi was in Russia the week the Soviet Union fell. He was Kremlin correspondent for the Sunday Times, and he wrote Hitler's Piano's Pair and The King's Speech. It's a first-hand account of the people who lived through it, of the fall of the Soviet Union, and as the title would suggest, Who Lost Russia. We were told by governments like America and the British government that this was supposed to be the end of history, as he puts it, the whole world would embrace democracy, but as you can see, far from that has happened. It basically tells the account of how Russia fell back into the hands of authoritarianism, and what we can do to try and bring freedom back to the...
So finally, would you recommend it as a good read?
I would, yeah. It's very interesting. It brings up both sides.
So Louis, as one of our newest recruits onto the programme, what is our political gaff? What is your political gaff of the week?
It's got to be there's no unemployed people.
There's no unemployed people.
Really, that is such a stupid thing to say. Honestly, live television, well not live, but just on television, I guess. Don't really say that, especially up and coming with the old budget. Don't want to be saying those things. It doesn't look good for the Conservatives, not very representative.
I remember 20 years ago we were worrying about what was going to happen to the million shorthand typists in Britain as the personal computer took over. Well, nobody has a shorthand typist these days, but where are all these unemployed people? There are no unemployed people.
So, thank you very much for tuning in to today's podcast. I've been Jack Wilfan, your host.
I've been Charlie.
I've been Louis.
I was Tom, but I'm not anymore.
And I'm still Django.
Well, thank you very much. See you next week.
Bye.